For the benefit of the panelists, we are now live on YouTube. We're going to commence the recording of the webinar on Zoom as well. Professor Anwar, it is 7:30. Over to you. If you could activate your camera and take control. Assalamu alaikum.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Greetings of peace and a warm welcome to this panel discussion. It has been organized and hosted by the Islamic Medical Association of South Africa, in brief called IMA, and it is specifically trying to provide information on vaccines, COVID vaccines. I am Professor Anwar Hussain. I'm a head of the Department of Medical Microbiology at the University of Pretoria currently. This is a unique panel session in that it is all organized by the Islamic Medical Association and also open to the public. So a very warm welcome to all attendees on Zoom, those watching live stream on the IMA channel on YouTube, and listening via the various media partners who are airing the discussions tonight, namely Radio Islam, Channel Islam International, Radio Al Ansar in KwaZulu-Natal, Radio 786 and the Voice of the Cape in the Western Cape, Salam Media, via Smart Bilal on the Muslims for Humanity channel, and watching on ITV channel 347 on DSTV. Ahlan wa sahlan. As is customary, we will begin with the recitation from the Holy Quran, where we will hear the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being recited. And this is going to be done by one of our esteemed panelists, Mufti Shafiq Jakura. Mufti Sahib.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to all the listeners and the viewers this evening. We decided, the organizing committee decided that we will recite Surah Al-Fatiha because number one, it is the opening of the webinar. Number two, it is also known as Surah Al-Shifa, or the Surah of Cure, which is very pertinent and relevant in the times that we live in. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم.
Mufti Sahib, you're on mute.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين صدق الله العظيم.
Mufti Sahib, you finished? Shukran.
Yes.
Okay, shukran. Thank you very much for that beautiful recitation of the first chapter of the Quran, and with its message of us acknowledging the Creator and asking for guidance. So we have this very, very esteemed panel, and I will I will give a brief bio on Mufti Jakura, and for the others as we go along. Mufti Shafiq Jakura is from Durban. He's a student and of the distinguished international Mufti, renowned Mufti Muhammad Taqi Usmani. Mufti Shafiq Jakura has been serving at the Fatwa department at the Darul Ihsan since 2007, and he is a member of the Sharia Supervisory Board of various Islamic financial institutions. And we are very privileged to have Mufti Jakura on the panel. At this moment, we will now show a short video which was going to highlight some of the work done by the IMASA, that's Islamic Medical Association of South Africa.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. The Islamic Medical Association of South Africa, IMASA, is a non-profit organization that provides health and medical care to the disadvantaged and underprivileged communities in South Africa. As Muslim healthcare professionals from various specialities, we believe it is our responsibility to serve the community and give back from that which our Creator has favored us with. The organization initially provided healthcare services to the forgotten communities during the apartheid era, and today continues to provide quality healthcare services to those in need, specifically in the rural areas where public healthcare services are poor and still not existent. Our services are carried out with much love and concern, and hope to continue the good work for the pleasure of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The organization is a network of Muslim healthcare professionals striving towards serving humanity and working towards a common goal of uplifting the conditions of those less fortunate. Are you a Muslim healthcare professional and would like to join this noble cause? Then visit our website at www.ima-sa.co.za. Join IMASA today, your pathway to Jannah.
Okay, so that was a short video. I mean, the organization as such has been formed about 40 years ago, and it is an organization of healthcare professionals, so it's meant to serve the functions of the healthcare professionals, such as health education, promotion, like these seminars, educational seminars, conventions, etc. However, the organization plays a very important and significant role in social welfare activities, as shown in the video. And these include running primary healthcare clinics, a dialysis program for the needy, a cataract program for the indigent, and as well as in currently doing very active work providing oxygenators for free. And it played a very important role in the building of the Ahmad Al-Qadi Hospital in Durban. So that is sort of the activities currently, and there are future activities being planned, such as a frail care facility as well. So as you heard, we encourage healthcare professionals to get involved in the organization and become members, and we also acknowledge and support the help of the public in contributing to the many projects. Shukran. Now, I'd like to move on, and I'd like to introduce the format for this particular panel discussion. What was decided by the organizing committee is to request or gather questions on pertinent aspects of the vaccine, the COVID vaccine. And then we collected these. There's a committee that collected these, and the plan is to engage each of these distinguished panelists with questions that have been collected. So we will look at some of the important aspects or common questions first, and then we will look at specifics as well. In terms of the, because it's such a wide audience, we will get the panelists, I'm sure, to explain things a little simply so that the non-medical people can follow as well. We understand that people have theories, they have beliefs, etc., and you will appreciate that that is not the purpose of this particular panel discussion. So here we want to provide accurate, useful, meaningful information which will be of benefit. And we seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance to achieve this purpose. Furthermore, this particular panel session is not sponsored, so there's no commercial aspect to this one. So, and everyone participating are doing it for the cause, fi sabilillah. Okay, so now we've got the panel, and I'm going to pose the questions and go along. But I thought I'll take the liberty of just a bit of putting on my teaching hat, in terms of providing a little information on viruses before I engage the panel. So just briefly, as everyone may be knowing by now, viruses are nucleic acid. They're either RNA or DNA, and they have a little coat on them, a protein capsid. Some of them have a little envelope. They are found everywhere. They're found everywhere. Viruses infect even insects. They are insect viruses. And they are plant viruses. The plant virus, which has commercial significance, is the tobacco mosaic virus. And this can cause big losses to the tobacco industry. So if tobacco plants are infected by the tobacco mosaic virus, they have to be removed. And because they are transmitted by contact, the planters have to wash hands when they are replanting. Again, so that emphasizes the sanitation aspect, that prevention by hand washing when even planting. Then the animals that infect animals, and the one that's very important for us is rabies. If a virus, the rabies virus, infects a dog, and if the dog bites a human, the fatality is 100%. And it can be prevented by giving vaccine and antibodies. So again, there is a role, and there's nothing new about the issue of prevention by using vaccines. And the animals are prevented by vaccination as well. So I thought I'll just put this before we start, and just as a information on what I call a little biology lesson. Okay, currently we are on the third wave of the COVID-19 epidemic in South Africa. And as of today, there are 17,000 new cases. A few weeks back, 4 or 5 weeks back, there were less than 1,000. So we have a significant increase in the number of cases, and the mortality is high, more than 300 deaths. Now, I'd like to go with the first question, is more on a clinical side. And I'm going to pose that to Professor Akhtar Ghulam Muhammad. He's on the panel. Professor Akhtar is a specialist physician, pulmonologist, intensivist. He's in practice in Pretoria, but he was awarded the 1995 South African Pulmonary Society Research Fellowship Award. He spent time as a research fellow in the Department of Immunology at University of Pretoria, and then at the National Heart and Lung Institute in London in 1997. He was previously the chief specialist and head of intensive care unit, ICU, at the Dr. George Bukhari Academic Hospital, and he was the head and associate professor of intensive care at the Sefako Makhato Health Sciences University. Well, that's a brief bio on Professor Akhtar, well qualified and a significant clinician in practice. Now, Professor Akhtar Ghulam, there have been a number of questions that have been raised in terms of the cases of COVID. And from a clinical point of view, where patients display flu-like symptoms and they are unsure what precaution to take. Can you give us a brief background and advice as to what patients need to do when they have symptoms and if they're exposed to other persons and what measures they need to take?
Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay. And where the video is not coming on, it says it's blocked by the host. So I don't know if you can see me.
I'm not seeing you. Oh, there you are there. You are there now. Shukran.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to all the viewers and the listeners to this program. So as far as the symptoms go, Anwar, the symptoms can vary from patient to patient, and they can be, some patients can have absolutely no symptoms at all, and they can still harbor the virus. Then there are patients that may have mild symptoms, particularly that of an upper respiratory tract infection, which is basically where you get involvement of the nose and the throat. And so they may have a mild cough, a runny nose, tearful eyes, and it's almost like a cold like you would normally get. And then some people can get more like a respiratory tract infection, which is usually like the flu, where they will actually get features of a fever and muscle aches and pains, and then coughing excessively and some shortness of breath. And then that can progress further, and some people can end up with a pneumonia, where they then become hypoxic even sometimes, there's lack of oxygen in the blood. And then it can go further even and involve all the other organ systems. Hello?
Hello? We're hearing you.
Can you hear me? Okay. And then some people will have other symptoms as well, mild symptoms like loss of taste, loss of smell as well. Now, once you've had exposure to the virus, so if you've come into contact with somebody that's had the virus, the first precaution is that you should isolate yourself, self-isolate at home. There may not be a necessity to do any testing initially. If you are asymptomatic after a few days, you could then stop your isolation. If you've come into contact with somebody that's close to you or living with you, then you will actually have to isolate for a long period of time. So at least 10 days is the ideal thing. You could then also, if you want to, do a test for the PCR, which is usually either a nasal or a throat swab, but it may not be essential. And then if you become symptomatic, then it varies. So if you become having flu-like symptoms and you become short of breath, then you will need further blood tests, and that will include things like a full blood count, a CRP, which is a marker of inflammation. You may even need something like an interleukin-6 levels to be done. So the spectrum would vary. Jazakallah.
Shukran, Akhtar. Thank you very much. for that sort of overview. And just before I move on, what will be the advice for people who say they have a flu? I mean, you said they should watch for a few days and then go for testing.
Well, I think with the current climate, if you've got a flu or flu-like symptoms, you should presume you've got COVID, unless otherwise, okay? Because that is a predominant virus at the moment, and most likely what your symptoms are suggestive of is not influenza, but more likely COVID. So if you feel that you can cope with the symptoms, then just isolate yourself. If you've got more symptoms that you cannot cope with, then obviously, then you would need testing. Okay. But certainly, assume that you got COVID, because I mean, I just had a patient today, for example, that is presented with symptoms of shortness of breath for a number of months. And when we done the X-ray, he's got features of what we would call a post-COVID symptoms. And when I asked him, he said he had a flu in February, but his doctor never tested him. So certainly that type of patient should have been tested, and then we would have known that he actually had evidence of COVID.
Okay, no, very useful advice for us. You focused on the issues of social, or what you call physical methods. And what I'd like to now go and ask Mufti Chakura, in terms of the question that comes up, which has been submitted by a number of people. Vaccines have been used against contagious disease or infectious disease. And there is a hadith which is being quoted by a number of the questioners that there is no contagion. And based on this, people are confused with the current state of, regarding pandemic. And therefore, they are not serious when it comes to the need of a vaccine or adopting any of these physical methods of prevention, which are the non-pharmaceutical methods. Could you, Mufti Saab, clarify this for us?
Jazakumullah for that, Brother Anwar. There is absolutely no doubt in the fact that there is a hadith in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam states la adwa, that there is no such thing as contagion. And based on the apparent meaning of this hadith, it is certainly the view of many scholars, among them possibly the Sahaba, some Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum as well, based on the apparent wording of this hadith, that there is no such thing as contagion when it comes to the passing on of a virus or a sickness. But when you study the whole of the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, there are also other ahadith. For example, there is a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in which Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam says to us and says, "Firra min al-majdhum firaraka min al-asad." Run away from the leper, a person who has leprosy, like how you would run away from a lion. There is a hadith in which Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, on the other hand, fed a leper with his own hands. And there is a hadith on one occasion where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam refused from shaking the hand, making musafaha with a person who was afflicted with leprosy. Then there is a hadith in which Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam also says that we should, if there is a pandemic or a plague in a certain area, then a person must not enter that area. Those who are within that area must not come out of that area. So all of these hadith, if you look at it, if you look at the apparent meaning of all of these ahadith, a person could get somewhat confused. So yes, we must be very clear in our mind, and it will be academic dishonesty to say that there is no view, that there is no such thing as contagion. There is a view like that. And the view is of authentic scholars of deen. Some Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum had that view, that there is no such thing as contagion. But many other Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum, many other scholars have also looked at all the ahadith, and they have reached the view in the light of all the ahadith, in the light of medical advancement, in the light of medical evidence, and they have mentioned, like Mufti Shaykh al-Islam, Mufti Muhammad Taqi Usmani Sahab, in his magnum opus, his work on the commentary of Muslim, after discussing all of these ahadith, he mentions that if it is established by medical evidence that certain diseases are contagious, then such medical or such scientific evidence is not incompatible with the statement in the hadith which says la adwa, there is no contagious disease. What la adwa actually means, according to his understanding, is that what is specifically being negated in this hadith is the claim that a disease is effectual by its own nature per se, without it being created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it will pass on without the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is what Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam wanted to negate when he said la adwa. That is what he wanted to negate when he said la adwa, that look, a disease is not going to spread if it was never the hukam and the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As for the belief that the transmission of bacteria or viruses sometimes causes disease, just as other harmful substances do, all these causal effects are dependent on the will and the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and of course taqdeer, and the understanding that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not will the causality, the transmission of the virus will not occur, or if it is so transmitted, it will not necessarily be divinely decreed to achieve a causal effect. And this is the correct belief that we must have, that look, la adwa, we must not believe that a disease or a sickness is contagious intrinsically in itself, without, even if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't wish, it will pass on. In Jahiliyyah, in the days of ignorance, they believed that a sickness is some type of monster that can just go and attack you and harm you without the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is not the case. So we learn from this hadith that the actual meaning of this hadith, according to many scholars, is that la adwa means that there is no such thing as contagion intrinsically in itself. But because contagious, such as plagues, etc., the Holy Prophet ﷺ also asked us to take precautionary measures. But the adoption of such precautions, we must remember, is never contrary to trust or tawakkul or taqdeer, that the individual believes that these precautions are not causally effectual in themselves, in the sense that their causal efficacy is at all times dependent on the divine will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in a nutshell, contagious diseases, although in practice they are contagious, however, their transmission is at the level of belief, not effectual in its own nature per se, but their causality is dependent on the divine will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is one point that I wanted to make in the meaning of this particular hadith. The other point is that together with this, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam also very clearly asked us to adopt the means. Do not enter a place where there is a plague or pandemic. Do not come out of a place when there is a plague or pandemic. And it reminds me of the the hadith at the time of Ta'un Amwas, the plague of Amwas, in which Hazrat Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was outside of Syria, outside the area where there was a pandemic, and he inquired from within. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu ta'ala anhu was within, and Hazrat Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu had decided he's not going to enter that place. And Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said to Hazrat Umar radiallahu, both great Sahabis of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he said to him, Atafirru min qadarillah, O Umar, are you running away from the taqdeer of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu on that occasion said to Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, and said to him that, Na'am, afirru min qadarillah ila qadarillah. Yes, I am running from the decree of Allah to the decree of Allah. Wherever we are, it is going to be the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in the world of means that we live in, we are required to adopt the means that are within one's control. And that is what we should be doing. And like the questioner mentioned as well, vaccines have been used and very effectively so against contagious diseases, and therefore it is the duty of the ulama to guide the public, and of course the duty of the medical practitioners also to guide the public with regards to the efficacy of this vaccine. The ulama have to guide with regards to the permissibility or impermissibility of the vaccine, and this is a duty that should be that is there of the ulama. Jazakallah.
Thank you for that very comprehensive response to that, and it is a vexing question which is being raised by a number of people, and I think it's very nice for us to get that information which you provided. Shukran, Mr. Now I'm going to go to the specific vaccine question, and I'm going to pose this from what has been sent to Professor Shabir Mahdi. As you know, he's well known. He's a national and international authority on pediatric infectious diseases. Currently, he's the Dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences, Professor of Vaccinology at the University of Witwatersrand. He holds a position of Director of the South African Medical Research, the MRC Council Vaccines and Infectious Diseases Analytical Research Unit, and a co-director of the African Leadership Initiative for Vaccinology Expertise. And I think he's also well known in terms of being the lead person for the COVID vaccines. The first two studies were undertaken in Africa. And as you know, he's involved in multiple epidemiological studies on COVID-19. And from an academic point of view, he's well-known, well-respected, and he has more than 500 scientific manuscripts published, and a lot of them are on vaccine preventable diseases. So shukran, Professor Shabir, for coming on as a panelist and giving us your valuable time. It is appreciated. And now the question which questions a number of have posed, they want to know an overview of a vaccine and how it works. And particularly about the COVID vaccines. Over to you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So thank you for the invite and having me. So what are vaccines? So vaccines are what we call biological substances. That means it's manufactured in the laboratory. And the purpose of vaccines is to sort of get an immune system ready and prepared that should they experience a particular germ that you're targeting, that your body would be able to get rid of that virus or bacteria as quickly as possible. Now, when we talk of vaccines, there's a number of different ways in which vaccines can be developed. Sometimes what we do is that we take the virus itself and sort of weaken it, and then that allows the virus to be able to induce this type of immune response without causing an illness. An example of that is something which most of us probably have already received, and that is a vaccine against measles or a vaccine against polio, which used to cause millions of children to die and which is to cause millions of people to develop paralysis. So those are your live attenuated vaccines. At other times, what we do is we take the virus and inactivate it. That is, the virus can't replicate anymore after it is administered, but it does exactly the same thing. It stimulates your immune system to produce its antibodies and what we call T cells, another arm of the immune system, which again, if you're exposed to that bacteria that you target, the germ that you're targeting, your body is once again prepared. So those are called your inactivated vaccines. And the reason why I'm going through this is we just need to be clear what type of vaccines are actually available. Now, a third category of vaccines is where we take a bit of the germ that we're targeting, be it a bacteria or a virus. And usually these bits are found on the surface of these organisms. That is purified, that is injected, and once again, it induces an immune response. So an example of that is a vaccine that we use to prevent whooping cough. Something that is not commonly seen any longer, but in the past, again, it used to cause thousands of children to be hospitalized and thousands of children to die. Then the fourth one, and this is a relatively new technology. It is a new technology in the field of vaccines, but not a new technology per se, in that this technology has been used in the past to actually treat for cancer. And this is called gene-based vaccines. Now, for COVID-19, what many people have heard about is what is known as the messenger RNA vaccines. So this is taking a bit of the genetic component of the virus, which codes for a specific target that you want the immune system to respond to. And this target that we're trying to prime the immune system to respond to is known as a spike protein. So the genetic material that codes for a spike protein is put into a fatty type of a bubble, and that is injected into the muscle. Now, this genetic material, once in the muscle, that fatty bubble is sort of disintegrates, and it allows the genetic material to be read by the cells, the cell machinery of the host. And what happens is that the host now produces that protein, the spike protein, it presents it to the immune system, and the immune system once again mounts a response, which is what is going to prepare us to fight off the germ when we are exposed to it. Now, importantly about this messenger RNA vaccines is that the way this messenger RNA vaccines are constructed is that very soon after they actually injected into the cell, and when that message is given to the cell to start producing the spike protein, this RNA disintegrates immediately. The RNA can't integrate into the human DNA. It doesn't have the necessary enzyme that would allow it to actually integrate into the human DNA. So this RNA material disintegrates very soon after it has signaled to the cell what protein to produce. So 4 different types of vaccines that I've mentioned. Now with COVID-19, the vaccines that are currently available in South Africa are your what you call vector-based vaccines, which is sort of similar to the gene-based vaccines, the messenger RNA vaccines, except this time round, they've taken a virus, they've inserted a genetic material into the virus. And again, that virus that they've inserted the genetic material into, firstly, it won't cause illness in an individual. And that virus that this genetic material has been inserted into does not replicate. So it's called non-replicating vector-based vaccines. And the purpose, again, is just to deliver the genetic material into the muscle so that the muscle cells can start using that information to produce a spike protein that is being presented to the immune system. So in South Africa, currently, we've got 2 vaccines that are available. That is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That is an example of this non-replicating vector-based vaccines. And then we've got a messenger RNA vaccine, which is a Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. So 4 different types of vaccines, but the ones that are currently used in South Africa are just the non-replicating vector-based vaccines and the messenger RNA vaccine. An example of the protein-based vaccines that I referred to, where you're taking the actual spike protein and sort of administering that to an individual, is a Novavax vaccine, which is not available in South Africa. The 2 other vaccines many people might have heard about is the Sinovac vaccine. That is a vaccine from China. That is an example of a vaccine that is known as an inactivated vaccine. So it's taken a virus where it has deactivated it. The virus can't replicate anymore, but it's very similar to the original virus, but it hasn't got the ability to actually cause a person to become ill. And then you've got a Sputnik 5 vaccine, which is similar to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but this time around you need 2 doses of the vaccine. So hopefully I didn't confuse you too much, but those are the different categories of vaccine. And importantly, again, to emphasize that both for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as well as the Pfizer vaccine, they are delivering genetic material into the muscle, but that genetic material does not integrate into the human cell at all. So it's not going to bring about some sort of changes in a person.
No, that's very useful information and a very nice explanation of the different types of vaccine, Professor Shabib. I just the 2 points here, which you've emphasized that, and which has come up with repeatedly with a number of that this new technology, it'll lead to integration, and you've informed us categorically that's not the case, because it doesn't have the equipment to have enzymes to integrate into the human DNA. The second point was another question was raised, and you've mentioned it, but I think we need to just recap. Someone wants to know what happens to that lipid nanoparticles. Do they go and accumulate in organs or tissues? So maybe just recap.
Yep. So as soon as so remember, our cells are all the time breaking up. So your muscle cells are renewing almost on a daily basis, not on a daily basis, but a large percentage of your muscle cell is renewing. And once this substance with the Pfizer vaccine, where it's covered with this lipid particle, or formulated in a lipid particle, this fatty bubble, once injected into the cell, what happens is that fatty bubble actually disintegrates. So that fatty bubble doesn't actually end up being stored anywhere in the body. And again, to emphasize that the quantity of fat that's actually included in that vaccine is a fraction of what it would be, not even a millionth of what it would be in terms relative to the amount of fat you would consume by having a glass of milk in the morning. So these are not large volumes of fatty substance that we're injecting. It's invisible to the eye for all intents and purposes. So very nominal amount of fatty substance that is being injected, and for the genetic material to be released into the cell, and for the cell to start reading the genetic material, that fatty bubble needs to disintegrate immediately upon injection.
Oh, thank you. Shukran.
And much of the muscles in which these vaccines are being administered, those cells themselves usually will disintegrate as part of a normal process that would occur even in muscles where you're not injecting anything into.
Yeah, no, thanks, Professor Shabib, for that information. And you categorically, people can be rest assured that there's no accumulation of lipid, however minuscule it is released by the muscle. Now I'd like to address another common area, common questions that have come up, and that is asked by many people in terms of the permissibility of this. So I would like to now ask our panelists, Mufti Zakaria Pando, and just briefly, Professor Mufti Zakaria Pando is based in Johannesburg, and he currently serves in the Fatwa department of the Jamiatul Ulama of South Africa. Mufti Sahab, welcome, and shukran. Again, thank you very much for making yourself available. The questions a number of people have raised is regarding, the permissibility of COVID vaccines. There may be some views from different people of religious background. So the question is, are the vaccines halal? And are there any ingredients which are not permissible for the Muslims?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Jazakumullah, Dr. Anwar, for the question, and Jazakumullah for the IMA for hosting this program, allowing us to participate in this beautiful and important program. Our research and analysis are confined to only the ones manufactured by Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer. We have not done any investigation regarding the others, such as the ones manufactured by Moderna, Sputnik, Sinopharm, etc. Our Darul Ifta's research in consultation with medical experts in the field and other ulama and muftis led us to deem that both the Pfizer and the J&J COVID vaccines do not contain any impermissible ingredients in terms of the Sharia. And the Jamiat Ulama South Africa have also pronounced on this view through its various media platforms. And I will explain on this just now in a few moments. But before that, I would like to just maybe go back a little bit into the aspect of vaccines and how does the Sharia view the concept of vaccine. So we should understand that vaccines are used as a preventative measure against acquisition of an ailment. Just like a person would wear a jacket before leaving the house, knowing well that it is cold outside and that it will be a means of keeping warm against the cold elements, or would take an umbrella before stepping out in the rain. There's obviously no absolute guarantee of protection, but there's, due to experience and testing, experimentation, trials, etc., a reasonable belief that these intermediaries will be a means of protection. Ultimately, the trust is and should be always in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similarly, one should understand the case of flu jabs, taking ginger before the winter season, for example, using herbal COVID treatments, etc. The common factor between using these examples, the jacket or the umbrella, and using a vaccine, or for that matter, any medication whatsoever, or in fact, for that matter, using anything in this world, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made this world a darul asbab, an abode of cause and effect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam to continuously remind us that despite the world being one of cause and effect, it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone who has decreed everything, including the phenomenon of cause and effect. Hafiz ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi has mentioned in his Kitab al-Ruh that medical knowledge is either acquired from a wahi, prophetic revelation, which is considered as absolute knowledge or qat'i ilm. B, tajriba, which is knowledge acquired through experiences, experimentations, trials and testing. And C, manam, that is inspiration through dreams. The latter two are not classified as absolute knowledges, but rather classified as reasonably acceptable knowledges with a possible margin of error, which is termed in books of fiqh as ghalibul zann. The case of vaccines, as well as any medical treatment, falls within the arena of the second classification. That is, its knowledge is acquired from medical trials and experimentation, tajriba, and which is also recognized in Islam. Furthermore, medical treatment comprises of three parts: A, healthy diets and a healthy lifestyle; B, preventative treatments; and C, corrective treatments. Vaccines fall within the ambit of preventative treatments. Vaccines, like all medical treatments, is governed by four statutes and or four principles. And this is something very important for us to understand, that all medication will basically, the permissibility or impermissibility will revolve around these four principles. A, the aqidah. The aqidah should be correct. In other words, to believe that Allah Ta'ala is the absolute cure and preventer of disease, and that the treatment is merely a means that Allah Ta'ala has permitted. B, purity of substance, or we can say permissibility and non-ambiguity of the agency and means of treatment. C, reasonable safety, and D, reasonable efficacy. For purposes of the question, I think we will only focus on the second principle, which is the purity of substance of the Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. We might as well add at this point that in terms of the principles of fiqh, it will not be permissible to engage in any medical treatment that violate the rule of purity of substance unless A, one is constrained; B, there is no lawful alternative; and C, there is reasonable grounds to believe, which is called Zannul Ghalib, that the impermissible treatment provides relief for the ailment. In other words, there is reasonable efficacy. To expand on this in a nutshell, there are about 4 or 5 manufacturing modalities, which alhamdulillah Professor Mahdi has explained already. What I would like to move on to is that all vaccines work by exposing the body to molecules from the target pathogen to trigger an immune response, or the method of exposure varies in accordance with manufacturing modalities. In terms of the principles of Sharia, there is no prohibition in introducing a foreign substance irrespective of whether it is natural or artificial or synthetic, to the body in order for the body to react in a desired and positive manner, such as, for example, to strengthen the immune system or to heal it through preventative or corrective treatments, as long as it is reasonable to believe through tests and experimentations, etc., that its harm is not greater than its benefit. So consuming a specific natural herb or artificial synthetic chemical-based tablet or a vaccine for that matter means to introduce and expose the body to its compounds in order to trigger the desired beneficial outcome. So this will be permissible as long as it is reasonably believed through experimentations and trials and tests, etc., tajriba, that its benefit is greater than its harm, and as long as it's efficacious and halal in terms of its substance. This is in essence, the application of the principle of asbab, cause and effect. However, it is still essential for a believer to believe that it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will permit the outcome. Moving on to the actual question with regards to the purity of substance, in terms of purity of the ingredients of the vaccines, let's look at Pfizer itself. Pfizer has released a list of ingredients. Furthermore, they have commented that no porcine has been used in the manufacture of the vaccine, nor is any found in the product. With regard to there being any animal derivative ingredients, the vaccine ingredients provided by Pfizer to show that cholesterol is one of the ingredients which could be animal or plant derived. However, the public assessment report in the UK confirms that no human or animal derived excipients are found in the product. Likewise, the National Health Services and Medicines Regulation Agency of the UK has also confirmed this point. Other muftis, like in the muftis in the UK, such as Mufti Yusuf Shabir, etc., who have also conducted research in the Pfizer vaccine, confirm that it is permissible in terms of its ingredients to take the vaccine. If you break down the ingredients of the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, basically we have just about 4 categories. One is the active ingredient, which is the mRNA, which is synthetic. Lipids, in this category, we have the cholesterol, but I've explained already that this is not animal based. It has its salts, which is the potassium chloride, etc., etc., and then it has the sucrose. So basically, this summarizes the matter of ingredients with regards to Pfizer. So the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, as per the information provided by them, as well as the assessment reports coming out of the UK, contains no such ingredients which affects the Sharia permissibility. Therefore, on the basis of information on hand, the Pfizer vaccine cannot be ruled as impermissible or haram according to our research in this matter. It is therefore permissible to take the vaccine matter. Moving on to the other vaccine, which is the Johnson & Johnson one, from a Sharia point of view, purity of substance for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is analyzed from 2 angles. Product-related impurities and process-related impurities. The reason I'm touched a little bit on this is because the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a viral vector vaccine. And viral vector vaccines use modified adenoviruses to transport genetic material of the COVID spike protein into the human body, thus initiating an immune response. So to simply understand it, the viral vector may be likened to a delivery vehicle, which is the adenovirus that transports the spike protein of the COVID virus, which is loaded into that adenovirus and transported into the human body. So the adenoviruses that are used as vectors have been genetically modified to be replication incompetent, meaning that it's infectious and harmful nature, as well as its replicatory genes have been removed from the adenovirus. Hence, it could not cause disease within the body or replicate itself. So from a Sharia point of view, the purity of substance for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is analyzed from 2 angles. The product-related impurities in terms of its ingredients and process-related impurities. So from the list of ingredients provided, 2 questions arise. Number 1, using a modified adenovirus, and 2, the presence of ethanol. So from a Sharia point of view, the adenovirus has been purified and rendered harmless after being genetically modified. Thus, it would be permissible to use. Furthermore, the presence of starch-derived ethanol, it's actually a potato-based starch-derived ethanol, would not affect, which is normally used as a stabilizer for the in the vaccine. So the presence of the starch-based ethanol, which would not affect the Shari purity of the vaccine, nor the Shari permissibility. The view of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi is that should the ethanol be derived from any substance besides date and grapes, and the ethanol is not used for intoxicative and entertainment purposes, then such ethanol would be permissible to use. On the other hand, all process-related impurities have been either completely removed or reduced to a negligible amount during the manufacturing process through several purification processes that are recognized by the Sharia. Hence, the end product is ruled as pure and permissible as a result of these purification processes. Lastly, the vaccine has been deemed sufficiently safe and efficacious by the health regulating agencies such as SAPRA and the FDA under the EUA emergency use authorization regulations due to the side effects that may be experienced after having the vaccine administered. It is recommended that a health practitioner be consulted for a health specific opinion. The fatwa of other ulama on vaccines, Mufti Ibrahim, our respected and honorable Mufti Ibrahim Desai Sahib of Darul Ifta Mahmudiya Shawud, has recently published a fatwa detailing the positions of past ulama on the permissibility of vaccines in principle, despite some of them having impermissible ingredients. These were issued on the basis of public necessity. Likewise, there are many other ulama in South Africa and abroad who also hold the position of permissibility on vaccines and vaccination. So the summary of it all is that in terms of its ingredients and substances, alhamdulillah, our research points to the fact that this is something which is permissible to consume, even if it was something impermissible. But because of necessity, public necessity, our scholars have always allowed for this if there's no alternative. And this is why our fuqaha of the past have allowed vaccines, even though it may consider some impermissible components to it. But alhamdulillah, according to our understanding, these components that are impermissible or impure are not found in these two vaccines. As far as the matter of the safety and efficacy, that is something which we always mention, that it should be something which is reasonable, where the risk the benefit is much more than the risk, and the efficacy is also must be something which is reasonably experienced by trials and testing. Hopefully, this will cover and provide a satisfactory response to the question posed, Dr. Anwar.
Thank you very much, Mufti Saab. That was quite comprehensive and reassuring, to be honest, where a lot of people are, concerned in terms of their faith. They don't want to use anything impermissible. So I think this is very reassuring. Well, I think, and the points you made were of necessity and benefit being greater than the risk or harm. At this point, we are somewhere in halfway, or even a little more than halfway. So we will have a short break from this Q&A. We will ask Dr. Muhammad Adil Kaka. He will give us in a few minutes his personal experience regarding this infection. We will return to the, sorry, Dr. Kaka, we will return on the Q&A after your little personal experience. Thank you for coming on and willing to share what you went through.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All praises for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's truly by the grace of Allah that I'm even here able to talk to you today. Why I feel it's so important. With COVID, many times patients are isolated in wards where we don't get to see them, and we don't get to know what happens behind those walls and what that patient is going through. At the end of February, I was in perfect health. I was running nearly 5 kilometers every day. I was at my ideal weight, and I thought to myself, COVID affects elderly people badly, and it affects overweight people severely, and it affects those kind of people. Until I woke up one morning with a fever, and my whole life turned upside down. for a few days I was at home with fever and things, and then the shortness of breath began. I don't know how to explain it exactly. It's a hunger for oxygen. It's a thirst. It's not like any hunger you felt before. It's not like any thirst you've felt before. It's like you're permanently struggling just to be alive. It's. I remember on the first day that they admitted me into hospital and my saturations were dropping rapidly and I was decompensating. And they brought me, they brought the stretcher that I was in right next to the bed of the CT scanner. So the two beds were completely adjacent to each other. And they asked me, roll from this bed onto that one. It's literally a few centimeters to roll. Definitely less than a meter from one stretcher onto the next. And I didn't have the oxygen capacity. I didn't have the ability from running a few days ago, running kilometers. I didn't have the ability to move from one stretcher just to turn my body onto the next one. So they had to bring a hoist and lift me and, put me for the CT scan. And from then on, it was just a roller coaster ride, subhanAllah. You're lying there, struggling to breathe. You're looking at the monitors next to you, and you see your own saturations dropping and dropping. And then the doctors come into the room and they tell you, we got to start talking about the ventilator now. Once you deteriorate to a certain condition, once you're not getting in enough oxygen, once your situation becomes so bad, then they need to reaches a certain level. At each level, the type of treatment becomes more intensified. And they said, we got to talk about the ventilator. And I knew as a person with a medical background that once they're talking about the ventilator, the chances of survival are not very high. And, you're starting to talk, or whatever the percentages may be. And another thing that, so you're lying there in this bed of yours. In Canada, I was in Canada when this happened to me. In Canada, they used to have a system where when they come to a person who's going onto a ventilator, then they tell you, we're giving you 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it is. And you got to say your messages to whoever you want to. There's a chance we're going to put you unconscious, and there's a chance you may survive. And there's possibly an equal chance or less than that you won't survive, or greater than that you won't survive. And in those few minutes, you got to send all your WhatsApps to whoever you want to say those goodbyes. And once I'd been admitted in hospital, my 4 children were at home, and they all turned positive for COVID, and my wife. So the next day, the ambulance had to come to take her, and there were just 4 children left in the home. Why I'm saying this is because COVID has no boundaries. It shows no mercy. My 4 children were alone at home, all 4 positive with COVID. Nobody could come into the house to take care of them because they were all so sick. When the ambulance was taking my wife out, and she gave the passports and wills and all of those of our documents to my 15-year-old daughter and told her, these are the papers you may need. And the ambulance was taking her out. And let me tell you, it's just not worth the risks we take to put ourselves and our families in that kind of situation. And the ambulance people were actually in Canada. The paramedics said that we've never come across a situation like this where we got to leave children alone in a house, but all the children were positive. So they had to bring a police car outside to sit and guard the children. And we were in hospital, both of us. And what happened subsequently, just to summarize, is that it just becomes so difficult. There are nights when there's days and days of isolation, 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks without seeing the face of another human being. You're in that place alone. You're facing your maker, and you're facing the reality that my life quite possibly is at the end of its. You can't breathe. You can't get up. I didn't leave the bed for 10 days because I didn't have the energy to stand up, not even to go to the toilet. So this COVID, and somebody asked me the other day, say, is COVID real? They said, do you think COVID is real? I can't believe that until now, our people still have questions like that in their minds. No, there's many more important things to be discussed, and I think maybe just leave it at that, inshallah, that it's real and it's really cruel, this COVID. It's not, by the grace of Allah, and I can only thank Allah and thank the du'as of all of those people. And may Allah reward all of them that I am here today. But you don't wish it on your worst enemy. It's 4 months now, I still struggle to breathe. I haven't returned to work. I still feel like fainting often. Can hardly do most of the things I could do before. Don't put yourself through it. Don't even take a trial with COVID. Stay as far as you can from it. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah, Dr. Muhammad Adil. Kaka, what a harrowing experience. And thank you for sharing it and creating an awareness of the reality. And as you said, people still asking, is it real or not? And you've given us a first-hand experience. Shukran. We go back now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
People ask that in the wards I saw for myself in North America, lines and lines of people with the same thing. It's not a fake and it's not untrue. I saw with my own eyes. I experienced it and I saw it. It's real and it's happening. And young people who couldn't walk. For me, to walk 2 meters was like a celebration after those 2 weeks when for the first time I could walk. So it's real, it's real.
Thank you. Shukran. We'll go back to our Q&A. We are pressed for time. We have a cutoff with some of our media and broadcasting houses for 9 o'clock. So I'm gonna try and ask a few of the pertinent questions which have come up. So we've sort of addressed the big question about the halal, haram, permissibility. So I think that's now the issues of safety. And there's a lot of information or misinformation about harms, etc. So Professor Shabir Mahdi, let's address some of the safety issues. There are questions on the first concern. A lot of questions relate to is the rapid development of the vaccine. Was it rushed? Why were they? How that we have it so quickly? Were the safety checks compromised? Are we being experimented upon, etc.? So these are some of the questions that have come up, and then the adverse reactions to these vaccines. Can you respond with that one, Shabir?
So yes, the vaccines were rushed, but the reason why they were rushed is we can't wait the usual 10 years for a COVID-19 vaccine to come out, because had we waited 10 years, the number of people that would have died would be phenomenal. Now, how did we manage to do what we usually takes 10 years to do in about 10.5 months? And the way that it was done is multifold. Firstly, the amount of investment and the number of scientists that were involved in this particular project is something that exceeds any previous endeavor in the medical sciences. So money was not the problem. People that were involved was not the problem. Everyone pooled their set skills and worked hard 24/7 to make sure that they can progress as quickly as possible with this vaccine development, the discovery, as well as the clinical studies. Now, another important component is usually what happens is when we evaluate vaccines in humans, we go to different stages, what we call phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And that is usually done in series. What happened with COVID-19 vaccine, because of the urgency of the situation, is many of those different phases took place almost in parallel, or followed one another very soon after, very soon after each other. Now, what has that resulted in? It doesn't mean that we have enrolled any fewer patients to evaluate the safety of the vaccines than we have done in the past. So for many of the studies, including for the Pfizer vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there's over 30,000 people that were evaluated in those studies, half of whom received the vaccine, and a half will receive what we call a control or placebo group. And that allows us to analyze whether there's any sort of a medical event that can be attributed to the vaccines. And what all of those clinical trials were able to show is that the vaccine was safe. It causes some side effects, but those type of side effects are things such as a fever or some pain at a site of injection. And those are the type of side effects that we expect of all vaccines, because it tells us that the immune system is actually mounting a response to the vaccines. But even when vaccinating up to 40,000 people in these studies, unfortunately, there are some side effects which are extremely rare, which you wouldn't be able to identify in those sort of vaccine trials. So one example, with AstraZeneca vaccine as an example, is where women in particular, especially those under the age of 50, tend to develop blood clots. But the frequency of that is in the region of about 4 in every million people that are vaccinated. And out of that 4 out of every million people, there might be 1 that will unfortunately die. Now, those are the type of side effects you simply wouldn't be able to identify when you're actually doing a clinical trial that only includes up to about 30 to 40,000 individuals. So in short, yes, we did things in a rush, but we did things in a rush and we were cautious about how we went about doing things. We didn't compromise on evaluating the safety of the vaccines. And the reason we were in a rush is because we are in a rush to try to save lives. And COVID-19 vaccines are not set out to harm people. They're set out to prevent people from ending up in hospitals. They're set out to protect lives.
Shabir, the other 2 questions asked is the issue of myocarditis with the Pfizer vaccine and the risk of neurological conditions like Alzheimer's and MS, multiple sclerosis after vaccination. So that has been also raised by a number of people.
Right. So the Pfizer vaccine, especially in children under the age of 18, seems to be associated with myocarditis, and more so in boys than in girls. Also in people over the age of 18, there is some episodes of myocarditis, which is higher than what we expect for those age groups. And again, particularly in males. But the important thing of those myocarditis is that most of the myocarditis, in fact, probably close on to 95, 98% of those episodes are mild cases of myocarditis, which seem to be resolving on its own. So yes, Pfizer vaccine is temporarily associated with myocarditis, but at the same time, it's a self-limiting disease, which hasn't really resulted in people even ending up in hospital. In most settings, you probably wouldn't even pick up that myocarditis because many times people wouldn't even come forward to be investigated for the type of symptoms that manifest when an individual has got myocarditis. It's only because of intensive monitoring of people that were receiving these vaccines that we've been able to pick up this particular side effect with a Pfizer vaccine. Do vaccines cause Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis? And the short answer is, when we look at side effects of vaccines, most of the side effects of vaccines usually transpire within a certain window period after a person is vaccinated, usually up to about 2 to 3 weeks after you're vaccinated. That is when side effects would usually occur. There's absolutely no evidence that any vaccine, for that matter, has ever caused multiple sclerosis or Alzheimer's disease. So short answer is obviously these vaccines have only been around for less than a year. We can't be conclusive on anything, but based on experience with all of the other vaccines, it will probably be close on to highly improbable that these vaccines would cause those sort of side effects in the future.
No, thanks. Shabir, there's a number of questions, the efficacy, I'll come back to that. On this side effect issues, I'd like to bring in our clinician, Professor Akhtar, and to ask him to address some of these issues from his perspective. Professor Akhtar, there have been a number of concerns. You've heard about the blood clots, and then there are queries such as patients who are on anticoagulants like warfarin, aspirins, etc., and other blood thinners, and other allergies. So what's your advice, what's the information on this sort of safety in these particular categories of patients?
Anwar, generally speaking, as Prof. Mari has pointed out, the vaccines are very safe. But I think every individual needs to look at their own circumstances. As far as the side effects go, the myocarditis, as Prof has mentioned, there's been incidences of blood clots. Obviously, there's allergic reactions have been described as well to in the vaccines themselves, and those may occur. So, I mean, those symptoms usually are mild and they're transient, okay? I mean, I took the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, for example, and that night I had a little bit of a fever and pain at my injection site. Joints were sore for the night. And the next day I was a bit better. And then the following night, again, a little bit of symptoms. but by the following day, it completely settled down. Some other people that took it with me had a bit of headaches, etc. So you get transient effects. So obviously, the transient effects are mainly due to the immunological response of your body. So your body is responding to the vaccine, and that's the reason why you're getting these effects. As far as different groups go, there's a number of issues. If you're on an anticoagulant of any sort, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to take the vaccine unless your anticoagulant is above the normal. So for example, if you're on warfarin, if you're in your normal therapeutic dose of between the INR, which we normally aim to keep between 2 and 3, for example, there shouldn't be any problems of bleeding. If on the other hand, at that particular stage, your INR has shot up to 5 or 6 or something, and you might be at a bleeding risk, it may be better to postpone the vaccine for a short while. But most other people, if you're on things like your aspirins and your clopidogrels, etc., it's very safe to take the vaccine, and there's no complications whatsoever. If you are immunosuppressed for any reason, the question is not so much as to what the side effects you're going to get from the vaccine, but whether the vaccine will be efficacious in your situation. So some people who are on immunosuppressives might not mount an adequate immune response. So there's been cases where they've had to have a double dose. So for example, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine the one dose might not be enough. You might need a second dose to boost your immune system. Or you could use the one vaccine and then add in another vaccine from the other group to give yourself a booster. So that's happened in patients who have been immunosuppressed for any reason. But there's no reason, again, that they should not be able to take the vaccine. Pregnancy is one of the distinct risk factors, so it's not advised in pregnancy because we don't know the effects of the vaccine in pregnancy. And as Prof pointed out, in the young children, we still don't have adequate data yet to recommend whether those vaccines should take place. In terms of the elderly, for example, I think their risk-benefit ratio is actually the benefit ratio is much more than their risk ratio, because they are more likely to suffer from illnesses. And then even if there's going to be long-term effects from the vaccine, that may occur 10, 20 years down the line when you've already might have succumbed to something else. So for them especially, the vaccine will be highly efficacious and extremely useful. So overall, I don't see there being much problems with using the vaccines, generally speaking. And I think one other issue somebody has asked sometimes is if you've got allergies. So if you've got an allergy to a specific constituent of the vaccine, yes. But if you've got general allergies like egg allergies, etc., there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to tolerate that vaccine.
Okay, thank you, Professor Akhtar. I think you've given us a lot of information from a clinical point of view. And as I said, we've trying to cover as much as possible. So I'm going to move back to Professor Shabir. The one question, Shabir, is that, we said, you explained quite clearly that the mRNA vaccine has no problem. So I think the question here they've been asking is, what about the liability, the waiver of the liability for the manufacturing pharmaceutical companies, and that becomes our concern. Why did they waive the liability issue? Do you have any information?
Well, it's all about, in a sense, risks of benefit sharing. And it's basically, obviously, the companies are dishing out millions of doses of the vaccine, but they're also making billions of dollars from it, many of the companies. But at the same time, they are risk averse in that not wanting to have the company liable for something which is highly improbable that could go wrong. So they've been asking governments to ensure that governments put into place necessary funds that would be able to compensate individuals should there be an extreme unlikelihood that there are serious side effects from these vaccines. So, and different companies have been approaching this differently. As an example, AstraZeneca has not done what Pfizer has done. Pfizer has been much more rigid about countries needing to take on the responsibility for liability. With AstraZeneca as an example, for the vaccine that we initially received from the Serum Institute of India, that wasn't an issue. So it also depends on which company you're talking about. It's not all companies that are having the same requirements of government when it comes to covering for liability.
Yeah, not all companies and not all vaccines. Okay, then the efficacy issue. There's a number of questions here about the efficacy in terms when data is presented. They say, do they work against mild disease, against serious disease, preventing death? How do we know? So, and there's some concern that there may be individuals who get infected after getting the vaccine. Does that mean the vaccine is not working?
So just to perhaps for those that are not in the medical field, what do we mean by efficacy? What we're referring to is that the risk of developing an illness after you are infected with the virus is reduced by X percentage. So if you take 100 people and give 100 the vaccine and 100 the placebo, if 10 people in the placebo group get COVID-19 and 1 person in a vaccine group gets COVID-19, then your efficacy is 90%. So that just to clarify what we're referring to when we talk of efficacy. Now, in South Africa, we are unfortunate because the beta variant is dominating, the variant that evolved in South Africa around about November of last year. The efficacy for many of these vaccines, including the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, is diminished compared to how well the vaccines work against the original virus that was circulating, or even the virus that's currently circulating in India, or the virus that was initially circulating in the United Kingdom. So the vaccines do have different efficacy for different variants. They have got a lower efficacy for the variant that's circulating in South Africa, and particularly for mild disease due to the variant. But when it comes to severe disease, all of these vaccines reduces your risk of developing severe disease by 80% to up to 100% for the Pfizer vaccine as well as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So in a study that was done for a single dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in South Africa, it showed efficacy of 80% against severe disease due to the beta variant. The Pfizer vaccine against the beta variant in a study that was done in Qatar showed 100% effectiveness against the beta variant. So yes, the vaccines are going to differ, but it doesn't mean that if you're vaccinated that you're not at risk of being infected, particularly with a beta variant, and then you won't develop at least mild disease due to the beta variant. Because like I said, against the beta variant, unfortunately, all of these vaccines have got lower efficacy compared with its efficacy against the original virus for which it was actually designed. There are attempts underway currently to develop vaccines that are specific to the beta variant, but it will probably be only towards the end of this year or early next year before those vaccines that are specifically targeted to the beta variant would become available.
Sorry, I was muted. I say that sort of covers the concern of the efficacy against the new strain, and you've given us very good information there, which is very useful. The other questions that come up is that this spike protein, it causes damage, etc. I think you've sort of mentioned that it doesn't do anything, so I'm not going to go back to that question. Let's take the question on efficacy. The efficacy is not there. The question now arises that when do individuals who are infected take the vaccine? There are a number of questions there. How long after COVID infection can I take the COVID vaccine? Do I still need to use physical methods, etc.? So maybe you can pick up on that one there.
Yeah. So if a person has developed COVID, you're probably wanting to wait at least 2 to 3 months before you get a vaccine. And if you've had COVID before, you probably only need a single dose of the Pfizer vaccine. You don't need 2 doses because the second dose doesn't actually do much, because what happens is your body has already primed itself with that natural infection to be able to get the boost from the single dose of the Pfizer vaccine. So if you've previously been infected, wait at least 2 to 3 months before you get a single dose of the Pfizer vaccine or even the J&J vaccine. If you are vaccinated, can you still get infected? Like I said, these vaccines unfortunately don't provide 100% protection against mild disease due to the beta variant, which still makes up about more than 90% of all of the virus circulating in South Africa. So because it doesn't confer complete protection against mild disease, yes, you might still get infected and you might still develop symptoms of COVID. but those symptoms in all likelihood would be less severe than had you not been vaccinated. And particularly for high-risk individuals, people above the age of 60, people with underlying medical conditions, you will develop COVID again if you are exposed and haven't been previously infected after vaccination. But once again, you will be protected from severe disease. In South Africa right now, because of the beta variant, it is not our aim to protect people from getting infected or to protect people from mild disease, the sniffles. Our aim is to save lives. Our aim is to prevent people from being hospitalized. And that is what these vaccines are really good at. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine probably won't do much in protecting people against mild COVID-19. The Pfizer vaccine has got about 75% protection, even against infection and mild disease. So the vaccines also do differ in terms of how well they would protect against a beta variant, even just for infection and mild disease.
Yeah, you mentioned that the time period after infection and the reasoning. So they also there have been questions that previously the dose after the first dose, the second dose of the Pfizer was offered at 3 weeks, and now they are offering it at 6 weeks. So what is the optimal time? The question is.
Yeah. So I think with all of this vaccine, the important thing in South Africa is we don't have a large supply of vaccine. We've got very limited supply of vaccine. And it's more important to get as many people as possible, especially high-risk individuals, vaccinated at least with a single dose, rather than using up vaccines for the second dose. And the reason for that is that even after a single dose, you already start seeing significant amount of protection against severe disease, not necessarily against infection and mild disease, but against severe disease. That protection starts resulting as soon as 7 to 14 days after a single dose. So there isn't any, right now you can get a Pfizer vaccine up to 6 weeks later. For the AstraZeneca vaccine, as an example, we've shown that if you delay the second dose by 12 weeks compared to giving it 4 weeks after the first dose, you actually get a better immune response. And it is possible that even with a Pfizer vaccine, if you delay 2 months later or 6, 8, 12 weeks later, you might well get a better immune response than having a shorter interval between those doses. So right now, the recommendation in South Africa is 6 weeks. But even if government changes it to 3 months, because they're wanting to get more people vaccinated, at least with the first dose, that is not a train smash. It doesn't mean that we're going to suffer problems in the long term. And from a societal perspective, it's more important, like I said, to get as many people vaccinated, at least with a single dose, especially if they're at high risk of developing severe disease, than trying to get a few people vaccinated with 2 doses.
Sorry, what you've mentioned in terms of the spacing out and the reason given. So the question, some individual asking that now you've got an option. So the educators are being offered the vaccine, the teachers, etc. And they're asking the question: do we wait? Do we take the J&J that's being offered, or do we wait for the Pfizer, which they say might be given to them at a later stage? So there are a number of questions along that line.
Yeah. So right now you need to get your vaccine. You need to get vaccinated with whichever vaccine becomes available to you. We're not really spoiled for choice right now. And if you miss up on this opportunity and wait until later, all it means is that you're remaining unprotected for a longer period of time. So if you want to get protection as quickly as possible, especially against severe disease, make sure that you get whatever vaccine is offered to you as soon as possible. It might well be that in a few months from now, government decides that those individuals that did receive the Johnson & Johnson vaccine receives an additional dose of the Pfizer vaccine. Because what we see as an example with the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine is that a single dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine followed by the Pfizer vaccine probably gives you a better immune response than 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. But at some time in the future, when we got adequate supplies of vaccine, it might well be that it changes and that individuals that have received the current single dose of the J&J vaccine are offered a top-up with another vaccine, either another dose of J&J, or alternatively, better still, probably the Pfizer vaccine.
Okay, so I think as we get more information and as more vaccines become available, I suppose they will have choices. But currently, your advice is take the vaccine that is around, and it has Okay, I'm going to just move on now a little to Professor Akhtar and come back to you, Shabir. For Akhtar, there's a number of clinical questions. The questions in terms of long-term side effects, in terms of what they call of the infection now. Or are they long-term similar to those, in terms of what they call long COVID? Are you seeing such patients? And then the question is, how long after receiving a vaccine can you start exercise? Does the vaccine affect your diabetes, hypertension, cardiomyopathy? Okay, so these are some of the questions, Professor Akhtar.
As far as the effect of the vaccine on your diabetes and hypertension and your cardiomyopathies, etc., there's no effect of the vaccine there really. If you've got a cardiomyopathy, yes, obviously you've got the other risk. If you're prone to pulmonary emboli, for example, you've got a slightly increased risk. But as far as the diabetics go, there should be absolutely no other risk factors from the vaccine. So the vaccine will be safe in the majority of these patients. There shouldn't be any issues. In terms of the long-term side effects of the of COVID itself, yes, there's a number of side effects from the COVID itself, or rather consequences of having had a COVID infection, and that has been described as a so-called long COVID syndrome. Obviously, we know that COVID can affect, besides the lungs itself, which is the most common area which is affected by COVID, it obviously affects the heart as well, affects the brain, affects muscle tissue, etc. And so I've had patients that have come in with different complaints regarding the post-COVID, and it varies. There's a number of patients I've had, for example, a general in the army that had dyspnea, and we couldn't find a cause, and his lung functions were excellent. Chest X-ray and CT scan was normal. There was no evidence of emboli, and even a cardiac sonar was normal. But when we done the cardiac MRI, we found that he had evidence of myocarditis, an ongoing myocarditis, for example. So that was the cause in his particular case of having long COVID. I've had patients who've had on CT scan ongoing pulmonary emboli. So their problem has been a clotting disorder, which has been perpetuated, and they would need anticoagulation, for example, to improve them. We've had some that have had chronic coughs, for example, and if you do lung function testing on them, they might have obstructive airways disease. So they've got a post-COVID bronchitis, and then they would need specific therapy for the bronchitis with the anti-inflammatory, inhaled anti-inflammatories, etc. So, and
Akhtar,
then
one minute after. Sorry to interrupt, Akhtar. I missed out. The time is at 9. We are supposed to stop at 9. So some of the media houses may leave us, but we will continue for another 10-15 minutes to wrap up. So we're going over our allocated time. Some media partners will leave. We will continue in the 10-15 minutes on Zoom, on YouTube, on the IMA channel, and on Smart Bilal. So people can continue listening on those. So that's just to mention it for the other channels we may be leaving now. I'd like to thank the media houses that have allowed us to broadcast this. It is greatly appreciated, and we hope it has been beneficial. It is our dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides us to what is appropriate and what is adequate and what is comprehensive and what is beneficial. So shukran for listening, and we will continue now on the on Zoom, YouTube, and the IMA channel. It's on YouTube and Smart Bilal. Shukran. Sorry, Akhtar, for interrupting. Please continue.
Jazakallah. And then another consequence often is a persistent myositis. So the patients are often complaining of ongoing tiredness, and when we do muscle enzymes on them, you find that they've got ongoing myositis. So those are a number of the so-called post-COVID syndromes that we've seen. Many others, we don't even diagnose. But what happens is that the patients gradually get better over a period of time. So it does heal, and it's a question of often time being the great healer. As far as exercise goes after the post-vaccine, I'm not too sure. I think Shabir will be maybe a better person to answer that particular question. But I think just generally speaking, a week or two of any mild exercise shouldn't be an issue. So if you want to go for a walk, that's perfect. But if you want to go for a run or prepare for the comrades or something, it may be worthwhile waiting for about 2 weeks or so till your immune system has mounted an adequate response. That would be my guess, but I think Shabir can maybe elucidate that answer a bit better.
Okay, before I leave you, Akhtar, just the one question that comes up quite often, and even from medical professionals, the use of ivermectin as a prevention rather than the vaccine. Is there evidence to suggest it may be more protective than vaccines? I mean, there have been proponents for this use of ivermectin, and some of them are saying it should be used in lieu of vaccines.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any evidence that it is as good as vaccines. Okay, there is some data that it may help, but there's not adequate data to show that it is as good as vaccines. There are no big clinical trials showing efficacy as in terms of prevention as there is for vaccines. So definitely, I would rather recommend, if you've got a choice, get your vaccine. And then if you want to add ivermectin as an extra prophylaxis, or if you've got some contraindication where you might not be able to use the vaccine or have a vaccine, you can consider it. There's also the question of supply of ivermectin. I mean, it's not a registered substance in South Africa, so it's often imported from other areas, and we don't know what the quality of it is. There was a study done in the South African Medical Journal which showed a number of contaminants in some of the tablets that were imported. So there's no great formulations that are available to us. I've been shown some syrups that they tell me that it's ivermectin. It's like a little yellow syrup, and I'm not too sure what's in that syrup. Is that maybe, olive oil, or is it cannabis oil, or even maybe somebody's urine? And certainly I'm not going to be the one that's going to take that for prophylaxis. So I think, Shabir has got better scientific evidence for me to show me that vaccines work a lot better. So I would certainly rather, take the vaccine than take my risk with something like ivermectin. There is some evidence that it may work. I mean, when you look at the meta-analysis of the trials in terms of treatment, yes, there is some efficacy, but the current World Health Organization standpoint even is that there's no either harm or benefit, and so they're not recommending it because of that. And the trials are very small trials with different dosing as well. Some have used 6 milligrams a day, some have used it for 5 days, some for 1 day. So we don't have adequate data for it. There are lots of people that believe in it. I think if you want to use it, that's fine. I've got no objection to you wanting to use it. And it may have some benefits. The side effects, fortunately, are not too much from it, from what I know, but the choice is yours.
Oh, thanks. I think, Shabir, you would like to comment on the ivermectin story.
Yeah, I would much rather use my money to buy muchachos or Nando's than ivermectin.
Okay, we're coming towards the end. So Shabir, the other question being asked that we know from some of the recent data that vaccination is going on in a big way in other countries. We know in the Northern America, in US and UK, but they've achieved nearly 60% of the adult population, of course. That's in Canada and US, and in Europe it ranges from 40 to 60% of the adult population being vaccinated, and even Mexico and Brazil, which are probably what we call middle-income countries, they are vaccinated about 25 to 30% of their population. So there's a question asked, it says, our Department of Health target is 40 million by Feb 2022. So the question being asked, is this a realistic goal? Or if we could face a fourth wave, or are we moving at the right pace, or is it too slow?
Well, it's obviously way too slow, and we're not going to reach 40 million by February 2022, just like we were never going to reach 40 million by the end of December 2021, which was the initial target. And in fact, with South Africa, with the current type of vaccines that's available, doesn't actually need to vaccinate 40 million people. What we need to target is vaccinating the 15 to 17 million people that are at high risk of developing severe disease. Countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, they're not experiencing a massive number of cases from the Beta variant. So in those countries, vaccinating people, including children in some instances, you're trying to get to herd immunity makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, we're never going to get to the so-called herd immunity concept in South Africa with a Beta variant, with the current generation of vaccines. And even in the United Kingdom, unfortunately, it seems that because of the Delta variant, what was seemingly looking very promising until a week or two ago, they're now beginning to see the beginning of a third wave or a resurgence of COVID-19, largely because of the Delta variant. So short answer is we're not going to get to 40 million by the end of February 2022. We are moving too slow for the high-risk individuals. We need to do everything that's possible to speed up getting those high-risk individuals. And in fact, anyone above the age of 35, 40, with underlying medical conditions, they need to be vaccinated immediately. So government needs to throw open the doors of the vaccine sites and encourage people above the age of 40, and especially above the age of 60, but even above the age of 40, those that are obese, those that have diabetes, hypertension, chronic lung problems, they need to come forward and be vaccinated as quickly as possible. And if we can get at least 80 to 90% of those individuals vaccinated, we're likely to experience another resurgence around about November, December of this year. Even with whatever number of vaccines we do use, we're still probably going to experience a resurgence. But when we experience a resurgence, what we're trying to avoid is what we're experiencing this time around, where each day there's between 10 and 20 funerals taking place just amongst the Muslim community. And we can't afford for that to happen again. And the only way to avoid that from happening again is to ensure that those high-risk individuals are vaccinated as quickly as possible.
Okay, good. No, that's a very important message. Vaccinate, and then the target group should be done immediately. Thank you, Shabir. While we're on this question about what you call, I would like to address now to a question to Mufti Pandor. The question raised here by a number of people is that in the current circumstances, if one has tested positive, should that individual go to the masjid if they are tested, or even if they are sick with COVID? Because apparently there's some message going around that it's acceptable. Your viewpoint, Mufti Pandor?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. A person who has tested positive, and in fact, even a person in the current circumstances of the COVID pandemic, who is displaying symptoms similar to COVID symptoms, even though he has not yet tested, and until he is tested and his status is ascertained, must distance himself from others, and he must avoid congregating with others in a masjid. This is because it is medically proven on the basis of the principle that this world is a one of cause and effect, Darul Asbab, that the coronavirus, being an airborne respiratory disease, is spread through airborne transmission due to proximity of those people who are emitting the virus through coughing, sneezing, etc. So Sharia recognizes contagion and transmission of illness in tandem with the will of Allah Ta'ala. So therefore, in this case here, we should be, caring for others as well. And ultimately, it is a decision of Allah whether another person will eventually be infected or not. But knowing very well that the general nature of this virus is that it spreads by close proximity. In this case here, a person who has been tested positive must stay away from the masjid. there are a lot of fiqh texts, that points out to the fact that a person who is in a state of illness, or in effect that the person can infect somebody else, then such kind of a person should stay at home. There's an incident with regards to Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, and the aspect of a person, a lady that had leprosy and coming to the masjid. Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu prohibited the person from coming to the masjid, because the people will feel inconvenienced by that particular person's presence, as well as the possibility that this person, that a virus may spread in the masjid and wherever the person is congregating with others. So our recommendation is that the person that is tested positive should remain at home and not come to the masjid.
No, thank you.
Thank you. In fact, recently, as Mufti Ibrahim Desai Sahib also has produced a fatwa on this, a detailed fatwa with all the evidences, pointing out to the fact that such kind of a person should stay at home rather.
No, thank you. So categorically, stay at home. Don't go to the masjid if you are tested positive, or even if you're symptomatic. And it makes a lot of sense. And giving us good advice there of Hazrat Umar bin Khattab and what he did. Thank you, Mufti Pando. The question of vaccine, one question that comes up is the issue of acceptability. So, I mean, you've heard Akhtar mentioning him taking the vaccine. So when I talked about the COVID at one of the local masjid, the Musallis also asked me, did you take it? So, that comes up. So I want to ask Mufti Chakura that in terms of the scholars of religion, the ulama, the imams, etc., how is the acceptability of the vaccine?
Jazakumullah, thanks for that. The reality and the fact of the matter is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of scholars globally who have been taking the vaccine. Some of them, even to encourage the public, have been making it very public, doing it on video, so as to encourage the public to do so. From my knowledge and the knowledge that I have on hand, some great scholars globally who have taken the vaccine, and this is not just to mention their names, but to allay the fears of people, to say that, is it halal, is it haram, should we be taking, should we not be taking it? This is something that we should allay the fears of the people. So according to my knowledge, Shaykh al-Islam, Mufti Muhammad Taqi Usmani, the great Mufti of Pakistan, he has taken the vaccine. Mufti Mahmud Ashraf Uthmani, a great alim of deen, a khalifa of our elders, he is one of the ulama with his family who has taken the vaccine. Mufti Abul Qasim of Darul Ulum Deoband, who is also a khalifa of Mufti Mahmud Gangohi rahimahullah, he has taken the vaccine. The imams of the Haramain, they all have taken the vaccine virtually. There are currently some ulama and khulafa of Mufti Mahmud Hassan Gangohi rahimahullah of India who are visiting our shores. They have taken the vaccine. Many ulama of Nadwatul Ulama, they are taking the vaccine. And just very generally, they are ulama in various parts of the world, from Australia to Indonesia and Malaysia and India, the subcontinent, in the Middle East, in the West. A number of ulama have not only passed a ruling of permissibility, but have also taken the vaccine themselves. I want to touch on here that maybe just want to quote for a minute what our Honorable and late Mufti Taha Karan, rahimahullah, wrote from his hospital bed a few weeks back. He says, with regards to the vaccine, that I am not a doctor and I won't give a doctor's medical answer, neither am I going to give a long-winded theological argument. All I will say is this: suspicion of vaccines is induced by fear of sinister actors with agendas of world manipulation and domination. I reject that fear, he says, peaceful and secure in the knowledge that my Rabb has given more than adequate guarantee that he will not let such mass manipulation come to fruition ever. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, Yudabbirul Amr, he's the one who's controlling the world. And Maulana ends off his little note to the community by saying, please take the vaccine. It is not only the responsible thing to do for yourself and your community, it is also the choice that demonstrates your trust in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's remarkable the type of clear thinking that this person had in, on his hospital bed.
Shukran, Mufti Saab, for that information. It's very enlightening to note that the Islamic scholars, not only locally, throughout the world and on all these the ulums, they have taken the vaccine, and that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that information. It's very useful and it gives us a lot of confidence. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of nearing the end of the program. And for this Q&A, there are many questions I see on the chat there, but another 150 or somewhat. So we cannot address them all. What we've tried to do is attempted to do the bigger issues and get to broad guidelines. And we've addressed the acceptability issue, the issue of halal, haram, and the safety issues. So if there are other specific issues, I think you need to contact your healthcare professional and get that information. At this stage, I would like to invite the IMA president, Dr. Yaqub Ishaq. He'll inform us about some of the current work that's being done for COVID. Is Brother Dr. Yaqub on?
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. جزاك الله خيرا Anwar. It's getting quite late, so I don't want to take up more time. It is an excellent webinar. But from the Islamic Medical Association, the National Executive, we thank all the panelists and all the attendees for attending this very, very important webinar. But also to highlight some of the activities of the IMA, there was some mention in the video that was presented earlier. Our involvement with COVID-19 has been very intense from the onset. We set up many, many guidelines to guide the masajid, the ghusl, task teams, and we thank everyone that participated in that, as well as those that took part at a practical level. We started off in the first wave with PPE, face mask project, national projects, physiotherapy project, and right now we are very, very involved with the oxygen concentrator program on a national level. As many oxygen concentrators that we can get, they've been the demand has outstripped the supply. IMA doctors and healthcare workers, physiotherapists, allied, everybody is volunteering to support people at home. There are doctors that are actually volunteering even at a public facilities wherever available, and also at a community level and an individual level. So while this all is going on, concentrators is our focus at the moment. We are collaborating and networking with various organizations on the ground, in FMYO, Gift of the Givers, and many others in the country. So IMA's involvement is really something that has taken off with COVID. Not that we were not involved, is 40 years of work at the primary healthcare level with indigent support in underprivileged and resource limited areas. Also now at the tertiary care level with the Ahmad Al-Qadi Hospital. At the same time, we provide support to our fraternity like this webinar, and again, support to the community. So I suppose I could list a lot of activities, but time is running out. But just to say that IMA is very visible on the ground, and this is not to be to show off or to talk about ourselves, but to say that we want to thank all the volunteers and the IMA members, but also to invite all healthcare workers to participate, because not only is the demand for oxygenators outstripping supply, but the demand for human resources is required for all our projects. And you may visit our website for that. Jazakumullah khairah.
Thank you, Brother Yaqub, and thanks for that information and update. And we bless everyone who's been helping with the work, and Allah reward them abundantly. So I'm going to end off now. I'm going to ask, just before I ask Sheikh Riyad Fattar, who's from the MJC, to have the concluding dua, I'd like to just express my thanks. I'd like to express special thanks to our panel of experts for making the time available and for sharing their vast knowledge. It is really appreciated, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you abundantly. Also Dr. Adil Kaka for his experience, and a special thanks to the Al Baraka Bank, for they have allowed us to use this virtual platform and provided technical support of excellence. So there it's another Kaka, but he's not Adil, he's Muhammad Kaka. So Muhammad Kaka, we really appreciate what you've done, and besides that, you've brought barakah with your bank here as well. Shukran. I would like to thank all the media partners who have aired this webinar: Radio Islam, Channel Islam International, Radio Al Ansar, Radio 786, Voice of the Cape, Salam Media, ITV, and Smart Bilal, Muslims for Humanity Channel. And of course, all the attendees. And special thanks to the IMA Working Committee who worked to prepare this webinar. Dr. Muhammad Rayman was very active there, so special thanks to him. And if there are any shortcomings from the IMA organizing, please forgive us for that. And we request your duas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us and all of us barakah and blessings of note and good health, and give us the ability to continue the good work. Shukran, jazakumullah khair. Sheikh Riyad Fattar, will you please conclude with the dua?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil mursaleen. Sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma inna nasaluka al-afwa wal-afiyata wal-mu'afata ad-da'ima fi ad-din wa ad-dunya wal-akhirah. والفوز بالجنة والنجاة من النار. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزين في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين. اللهم أصلح لنا في ديننا الذي وعصمة أمرنا، وأصلح لنا في دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، وأصلح لنا في آخرتنا التي إليها معادنا. اللهم اجعل الحياة زيادة لنا في كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر. اللهم في هذا المساء ارفع عنا البلاء والوباء. اللهم اجعل هذه الأيام تمر ولا تضر. اللهم رب الناس أذهب البأس، اشفي أنت شافي لا شفاء إلا شفاءك شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم رب الناس أذهب البأس، اشفي أنت شافي لا شفاء إلا شفاءك شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم رب الناس أذهب البأس، اشفي أنت شافي لا شفاء إلا شفاءك شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم اغفر لأهل القبور من المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات، ارفع لهم الدرجات وكفر عنهم السيئات يا رب العالمين. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وأصحابه وبارك وسلم. اللهم افتح لنا بالخير واختم لنا بالخير واجعل عواقب أمورنا بالخير، بيدك الخير والعافية إنك على كل شيء قدير. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Shukran, Sheikh, and thank everyone, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.